Winter's grip was a tangible force. It sank deep into flesh. It lodged itself in bones. It stole feeling from hands and fingers. Each exhale formed a cloud in the air. The wind cried like a hungry wolf, stripping warmth relentlessly from exposed skin. The flames dwindled, supplies were exhausted, and still, the snow continued its descent. Most people would not have survived a single night, yet remarkably, some endured. This was the reality pioneers faced. Failure to conquer winter meant ending up as skeletons beneath the drifts. But how did they outlast harsh blizzards, the threat of starvation, and death itself? How did they discover warmth when encompassed by ice? And how did they wage war against a winter determined to end them? That is precisely what we are here to uncover. Stay tuned until the conclusion for a first-hand narrative. A mountain man's own words detailing his battle against impossible odds. Number 1. Bundle up or freeze. Frontiersmen understood the key to retaining heat. Generate warmth from the inside and contain it. Their attire began with a long-tailed shirt, sometimes wearing two. Over this, they pulled a substantial leather overshirt. Finally, they added a heavy outer coat, either wool or buckskin. Every layer trapped warmth, shielded against wind, and allowed for movement. An uncovered head meant significant heat loss. A wool cap, felt hat, or a cap lined with fur effectively held it in. And when the wind was particularly biting, they tied a neckerchief high, covering ears and mouth for added protection. Hands remained protected within thick leather mittens. Keeping fingers together increased warmth. Maintaining core temperature was vital. Without it, other measures were useless. This is where the belly band proved essential. Long sashes made of wool wrapped tightly around the waist, securing heat where it mattered most. At night, sleep was taken fully clothed, boots removed but hats remaining on, wrapped in furs and wool blankets, clustered near the fire's warmth. Keeping the feet warm was non-negotiable. If they failed, a man's ability to survive was compromised. Sturdy leather boots filled with fur kept the cold at bay. Wool wrapped around the lower legs created a seal, blocking snow and retaining heat. And if boots were unavailable or failed, frontiersmen resorted to moccasins. These were crafted from soft deerskin with the fur facing inward, sufficient for trapping warmth. Moccasins offered lightness, stealth, and were better suited for tracking through deep snow. Even the decorative fringe served a function, wicking away moisture before it could harden and stiffen the leather. And if damage occurred, they would cut a strip, tie it off, and continue their journey. However, crafting moccasins was a time-consuming process. The hide required softening beforehand. Brain tanning accomplished this, working the animal's natural oils deep into the material's fibers. The outcome was durable, pliable leather that endured, conformed to the foot, and offered defense against the cold. In dry conditions, they were lifesavers. But when wet, a complete disaster. Deerskin rapidly absorbed moisture, becoming stiff and ineffective. Consequently, when the weather turned damp, men either stayed close to a fire or switched to heavier boots. Historical records are sparse regarding fur side-in moccasins, but the practical reasoning is compelling. Some historians suggest frontiersmen adopted this concept from Native Americans, mirroring their assimilation of numerous other survival methods. Sheepskin boots function on the same principle, fur lining the inside to trap warmth, a design utilized in cold regions globally. Ultimately, frontiersmen were not concerned with fashion. Their clothing choices were dictated by the necessity of staying alive. Number 2. Sleeping through the cold. Maintaining warmth during daylight was a challenge, but surviving the night, that was a distinct struggle entirely. That was the period when their true resilience was tested. Frontiersmen typically did not construct elaborate log cabins. It required too much effort and time was scarce. Their focus leaned towards simple shelters like lean-tos, perhaps made of boughs and limbs stacked densely, covered with skins, blankets, or canvas. As previously mentioned, they slept fully dressed, and it's worth noting that frontiersmen rarely possessed sleeping bags. Few individuals owned them at all. If fortunate, a canvas or skin was stretched overhead, open towards the fire, capturing just enough heat to ward off the most severe cold. Wool blankets were the preferred bedding, warm, resilient, and easy to transport. Buffalo robes were also used, heavier but more effective at blocking wind. A candle, if available, flickered inside a lantern, although the light from the fire was usually adequate. Light also represented security. Darkness brought peril. However, some frontiersmen discovered a more effective method. Instead of temporary shelters, they spent winters in lodges constructed from buffalo skins, resembling Native American teepees. These were thick, tanned hides unfolded over a sturdy pole framework, spanning roughly 10 feet in diameter. This provided enough space for 6, perhaps 7 men. Inside, reeds covered the ground, layered with blankets and robes. Baggage was placed along the outer walls to prevent drafts. A fire burned in the center, with smoke escaping through adjustable flaps at the peak. These flaps could be adjusted to allow light entry, bright enough for reading. Their choice of fuel was often aspen wood, which burned cleanly. It produced no thick, choking smoke. This eliminated the need for candles, avoiding wasted supplies. And when it came to enduring the night, simplicity was paramount. The bedroll, essentially a wool blanket tightly wrapped within water-resistant canvas, was the frontiersman's indispensable companion. It kept him dry, shielded against the wind, and retained heat even when damp. He would spread it out on frozen ground, canvas down, wool up. If rain or snow commenced, he would fold the canvas over himself, creating a cocoon against the storm. Beyond serving as bedding, the bedroll also functioned as storage. Clothing, tools, provisions, anything needed was tucked inside, rolled tightly, and secured with leather straps or rope. He would carry it slung over his shoulder, or tie it to his saddle, and continue his journey. Cowboys relied heavily upon it. Soldiers adopted the practice as well, rolling their shelter halves similarly during the Civil War, maintaining mobility and readiness. And so, night after night, frontiersmen battled the cold. Hypothermia, after all, was a constant threat, poised to claim the unwary. Number 3. Fire or death. If you are interested in learning how frontiersmen survived the wilderness, what they ate, the tools they utilized, and the techniques that kept them alive, explore other episodes. We have numerous additional accounts of frontier survival available. Meanwhile, out in the wilderness during winter, nights were invariably long, and the cold merciless. However, one element could significantly shift the odds in a frontiersman's favor: fire. A frontiersman without fire. He was essentially a walking corpse. Every mountain man carried essential items: his rifle, a knife, a powder horn, lead balls, and a kit for starting fire using flint and steel. Some possessed additional gear: an extra knife, a tomahawk, perhaps even a flintlock pistol. And if luck was with him, he had a pack horse laden with provisions. Losing his weapon, knife, or horse meant facing extremely dire circumstances. When the heart of winter arrived, fire represented life itself. Fire cooked food, dried clothing, deterred predators, and, most critically, prevented a man from freezing solid. While a quickly built lean-to or a buffalo robe might offer some protection from the wind, without fire, these measures were ultimately ineffective. Flint and steel were absolutely necessary. A steel striker held in one hand, a flint rock in the other. A sharp impact produced sparks. The technique involved catching one on char cloth, a piece of charred cotton that glowed like a burning coal. This glowing ember was then placed into dry tinder, substances like fungus, shredded bark, or fine fibers. With careful breaths, a flame was ignited. No matches were used. There were no second chances if it failed. This process, however, demanded practice. A novice attempting it for the first time would likely fumble, curse, and perhaps spend the entire night shivering miserably. But for a seasoned mountain man, it was instinctive. He could ignite a fire during a blizzard, in the deepest part of the night, even with fingers half frozen. In trapping camps, wall tents provided more shelter, but were challenging to heat. They lacked a chimney or vent. Having a fire inside meant risking suffocation. Having it outside meant enduring the cold. There was no perfect solution, only reliance on experience, fortitude, and a will to persevere. In essence, fire served three purposes. It was a defense against the untamed wilderness, a signal for those lost, and a bold defiance of winter's bite. Without it, survival was brief. Number 4. Chores now. Staying warm was merely the initial step. Remaining alive demanded significantly more effort. During winter in the wilderness, inactivity was synonymous with death. Frontiersmen were compelled to stay in motion, work consistently, and remain active, because ceasing their efforts was not an option. Daily activities included hunting and trapping. This involved traversing miles through snow, hauling heavy pelts, setting traps in waterways choked with ice, and dressing game with hands numbed by cold. Osborne Russell documented these arduous tasks, and the continuous exertion required to secure food and ensure furs were collected. Then there was the crucial task of wood. One either chopped it or succumbed to the cold. Axes swung from the first light of dawn until dusk, splitting logs, felling trees, and fueling the fire that held the cold at bay. Shelters also required maintenance. Roofs needed patching, walls reinforcing, any effort to resist winter's assault. Even in the harshest part of winter, travel did not cease. Men crossed ice-crusted rivers, pushed through snow reaching their knees, and fought through storms solely to trade or explore new territories. John Franklin's expedition to the copper mines saw men marching 40 miles in a single day, experiencing starvation, freezing temperatures, and a desperate struggle for survival. As one might imagine, back at camp, the work never stopped. Someone was always skinning beavers, stretching hides, cooking meals, or repairing equipment. The youngest individuals handled the manual labor, while experienced men kept watch for potential threats. Warren A. Ferris noted that camp keepers were responsible for cooking, guarding the horses, and being prepared to defend the camp instantly. Sometimes these individuals were hired specifically for these duties. On other occasions, veteran trappers assigned these tasks to the less experienced newcomers. Joe Meek, who endured the Rocky Mountains, recalled waking to find ice crusted on the lodge roof. The trappers remained in their blankets, calling for the camp keepers to ignite the fire. Soon, the lodge grew warm, and another demanding day commenced. Trappers had their own set of challenging tasks. If the rivers were not completely frozen, they maintained their trap lines, sometimes employing specific tactics to extract beavers from beneath the ice. Joe Meek described the process, tapping the frozen surface, listening for a hollow sound, and then sealing off the opening. From there, they tracked the beaver's underwater passages, waiting for it to surface and snaring it during its journey. However, most winter trapping occurred in warmer regions or during brief periods of thaw. No flour, no vegetables, only freshly killed game stacked high. Nothing was genuinely essential for survival in the wilderness, except meat, according to William H. Ashley's writing in 1825. Buffalo ranked as the prime choice, though they also consumed elk, deer, antelope, bighorn sheep, and even bear when necessary. They ate excessively when opportunity allowed, burning off the calories in the cold environment. Winters in the Rockies didn't equate to scarcity, as game was abundant everywhere. Trappers' journals document hunts where they harvested hundreds of animals within a single season. For example, in the early winter of 1832, Andrew Drips's fur company established camp at the Snake River Forks. Men departed at dawn and returned with fresh meat before the breakfast meal. Warren A. Ferris described the sheer plenitude. Hunters would load themselves with as much as they could transport, and Joe Meek characterized the Powder River Valley as a hunter's paradise in 1829. That winter, the landscape teemed with game, and the trappers enjoyed a lifestyle akin to royalty, eating heartily, maintaining strength, and fully utilizing the wilderness before the spring thaw arrived. However, even the hardiest mountain men had limitations, and as the cold intensified, they sought guidance from those most knowledgeable about enduring it, spending winter alongside native populations. Number 5. Wintering with indigenous peoples. When heavy snowfall struck, experienced trappers understood where to seek refuge. Native camps. Finding shelter with them offered a significant advantage. But frontiersmen survived primarily by adopting the practices followed by local tribes for generations. Groups such as the Crows, Shoshones, and Nez Perces were aware of the most favorable wintering locations, areas less exposed to harsh winds and where game continued to be accessible. Some trappers even entered into marriages with tribal members, forging alliances that guaranteed access to food, protection, and trade opportunities. Marrying the daughter of a chief was not solely about romantic attachment. It cemented connections with the entire tribe. Similarly, for Native women, a trapper adorned in fine clothing from St. Louis represented a symbol of status, a provider who often treated her with more consideration than many warriors might. Some marriages lasted for a single season, others for a lifetime. Regardless, these unions were crucial for survival. Life within a native camp presented its own distinct challenges, nonetheless. James Clyman, a seasoned trapper, endured a severe winter with the Crows in 1823. He observed with astonishment as they regularly broke through ice each morning to bathe, even with frost visible in the air. To them, the cold was not fundamentally an adversary. It was simply an integrated aspect of existence. And for newcomers, effective communication was paramount. Some relied on interpreters such as Edward Rose, a black frontiersman who resided with the Crows in 1824. His fluency in their language and understanding of their customs rendered him indispensable, elevating his standing among the trappers. Another black interpreter encountered in a Crow village near the Shoshone River asserted he had traveled with the Lewis and Clark expedition. The tribe accorded him great respect. He lacked for nothing. Yet the majority of trappers did not have an interpreter readily available. If they intended to trade, eat, or simply stay alive, they were compelled to learn the local language quickly. Moreover, beyond simply hunkering down, winter camps functioned as centers for learning. Trappers exchanged narratives, shared effective strategies, and most significantly, acquired vital information from the tribes. In February 1824, deep within the Wind River Valley, the Crows informed Jedediah Smith's men about a northern shortcut, a mountain pass leading to areas rich in beaver populations. Smith's eagerness was such that he disregarded the season and pushed into the mountains immediately. The outcome was disastrous. Heavy snow overwhelmed the party, forcing their retreat. Back at the camp, however, James Clyman conceived a better approach. He laid a buffalo robe on the ground, covered it with sand, and allowed the Crows to illustrate a map for him. They molded miniature mountains with their hands, showing him a safer route, South Pass, situated at the southern extremity of the Wind River Range. By March, Smith and a small group of his men successfully navigated the crossing, reaching the Green River and advancing further west than any other Americans since the historical accounts. However, not all interactions with the tribes were amicable. Raiding parties posed a continual threat, and venturing away from camp could prove fatal. Nevertheless, trappers did not remain inactive. Some ventured out to procure meat, others for the thrill of adventure, and some merely to alleviate boredom. A single misstep could cost them their lives. In the winter of 1823, Daniel T. Potts became lost in the mountains and suffered severe frostbite on his feet, rendering him unable to walk or hunt, effectively sealing his fate. Yet, a native village discovered him, transported him to their chief's lodge, and ultimately saved his life. Twice daily, the chief stripped down to his breechcloth, attended to Potts's injuries, and nursed him back to health. It remains unknown, however, how many other frontiersmen owed their survival to a timely act of compassion. Number 6. Collective comfort. During the harshness of winter, when the wind sliced like a blade and the cold permeated bones, frontiersmen understood one absolute truth: being alone meant certain death. At night, mountain men congregated closely, a fire in the center, surrounded by men huddled in a tight semicircle, wrapped in furs, boots still worn, rifles within easy reach. Heat was life, and they ensured no one succumbed to freezing. If the fire's flames diminished too much, someone was consistently awake to replenish it, adding wood, stoking the embers, keeping the pervasive darkness at bay. Yet warmth was not the sole reason for sleeping in close proximity. A sleeping individual was vulnerable if not prepared. Predators were a constant danger, both animals and humans. Outlaws, raiding parties of Blackfeet warriors, hungry wolves, none were easily intimidated. Close quarters facilitated rapid defense. The sound of a twig snapping in the night meant knives were drawn instantly, before the sound fully registered. And when the deadly cold slightly subsided, then came the sharing of stories. Men circulated whiskey and laughter as if they were valuable commodities, trading tales of bloodshed, endurance, and fortune. Osborne Russell recalled evenings when laughter echoed through the camp like distant thunder, only fading as one by one the men drifted off to sleep. They engaged in target shooting, wrestling matches, and horse races. The fire burned brightly, and for a few brief hours, life felt remarkably easy. However, winter was not uniformly benevolent. Some nights the wind howled fiercely, and the fire barely managed to survive. And some mornings, individuals simply did not awaken at all. Nevertheless, those who survived remembered the more pleasant times. Washington Irving wrote that during winter, the mountain men lived comfortably and without restraint. Joe Meek described it as a season of abundance, rest, and good spirits. But ultimately, winter was never merely a period for relaxation. It served as a test. It was perpetually a test, and only the most resilient men lived to witness the arrival of the thaw. Number 7. A diet rich in fat food was synonymous with survival, and fat held supreme importance. As previously mentioned, frontiersmen subsisted on meat from animals such as buffalo, elk, deer, and bear, whatever they were able to kill. The higher the fat content, the more desirable it was. Fat provided warmth and sustained their mobility. Rufus Sage, an experienced trapper, wrote about this practice, how men would consume large quantities of meat when available, understanding that periods of scarcity were inevitable. Starvation was a potential seasonal reality. During certain winters, men were driven by hunger to eat their moccasins, their dogs, anything consumable. And when meat was difficult to obtain, they waited, hoping to discover a partially frozen animal carcass before hunger claimed them. Buffalo was the most prized quarry. Trappers highly valued its fatty cuts, asserting it was richer, superior to beef. And when herds were in proximity, they indulged, consuming vast amounts, accumulating fat on their bodies as a form of insulation. But when the herds migrated, they relied on pemmican, a preparation consisting of dried meat, rendered fat, and occasionally berries. Pemmican was considered equivalent to gold on the frontier. It was lightweight, had a long shelf life, and was densely packed with energy. Trappers, explorers, even expeditions to the polar regions depended on it. Robert Peary, the Arctic explorer, deemed it essential. Without it, his men would not have survived the cold. And in 1814, pemmican even ignited a conflict. Governor Miles Macdonell attempted to disrupt the Métis trade through his pemmican proclamation. The Métis responded with force. A lack of pemmican meant no survival. It was that straightforward. And although meat was vital for life, when it ran out, frontiersmen consumed whatever they could locate. Roots, berries, ants, even animal hides boiled to make them edible. Hunger showed no regard for pride. The choice was to eat or perish. Indeed, fat represented survival in another form. When the cold penetrated deeply, men applied animal fat to their skin to create a barrier against the wind and retain body heat. Tallow, derived from beef or mutton fat, was simple to produce. Frontiersmen would heat it slowly and then skim off impurities. The remaining substance was a thick, stable grease. They applied it liberally to their faces, hands, any exposed area. It sealed in warmth and provided protection against frostbite. They also greased their boots and other leather gear. Fat extended the lifespan of items, keeping moisture out and preventing the cold from entering. However, they were not the originators of this technique. Indigenous populations globally understood this valuable practice. In Western Australia, for instance, they combined fat with red ochre, creating a protective paste against intense sun and insects, and thus, on the frontier, every usable strategy was important. Bonus content. James Clyman's struggle for life. James Clyman traveled alongside legendary figures, Bridger, Fitzpatrick, Smith. But unlike many, he documented his experiences. His journals offer an authentic glimpse into frontier life. During one particularly brutal winter in the Wind River Valley, he and William Sublette departed from their camp to hunt. Their supply of meat was dwindling. Then a blizzard struck. Snow fell heavily. Wind shrieked through the valley. There was no natural shelter, no firewood available, only their buffalo robes, rifles, and sheer determination. And as is widely known, survival was an ongoing trial, one that many failed to overcome. And now, to conclude this episode, here is Clyman's own written account of confronting death directly, Saukisnido. Upon ascending the Popo Aji, a tributary feeding into the Wind River, we discovered an oil spring near the main channel. Its entire surface was covered with oil bearing a resemblance to British oil. Not far from this location were deposits of petroleum of considerable size. With buffalo being scarce, our food reserves were quite limited. Mr. Sublette and I mounted our horses one morning and set out in search of game. We rode until nearly sunset when we sighted 3 male buffalo in a very open and unsheltered area. Our horses were too thin to run effectively, so we attempted to approach them by crawling over the icy and snowy ground. But the animals detected our presence and were about to flee when we stood and fired. Fortunately, we managed to break one's shoulder. Had our horses been close by, allowing us to mount and pursue, we would have secured meat quickly. But our horses were almost a mile away. So Sublette returned for our horses, and I reloaded my rifle and followed the injured buffalo. There being an uneven ridge approximately a mile away in the direction the game moved, my hope was to intercept him there and get another shot. I ran with all my speed, and luckily, when I emerged from cover, I was within easy gunshot range. Though completely out of breath, merely aiming in the direction of the animal, to my astonishment, I delivered a fatal shot. Before I could reload, it fell dead into a steep gully, preventing me from beginning the butchering process until Sublette arrived to assist me. Night descended before we finished butchering the meat. We gathered some dry sagebrush and managed to start a fire, by which we were able to cook a small amount of meat. Shortly after the sun had set, the north wind intensified, growing stronger and stronger, and a cold, frosty snow began to fall before we had finished our meager supper. With no available wood, and sagebrush being small, sparse, and scattered what little fire we had in all directions, we spread out our inadequate bedding and covered ourselves as closely as possible from the wind and snow that penetrated every gap. Although the wind blew and the fine frosty snow crept in and around us, this was not the worst hardship. The cold, hard, frozen ground upon which we lay was even more unpleasant, making sleep impossible despite attempting every method for rest. Daylight finally appeared, and we discussed the best course of action given our circumstances. It was agreed that I should get up and gather some sagebrush, which was small and scarce, while he would remain under the buffalo robe, keeping his hands warm if possible, to attempt striking fire. However, all our plans failed. As soon as our hands were exposed to the air, they became so numb that we were unable to grasp the flint and steel. We then resorted to our guns, but with no greater success, because the wind was so strong and we lacked any fine material to catch the spark. My companion wrapped himself in his robe and lay down. After a significant effort, I managed to saddle my horse and was preparing to leave the inhospitable location. Not wishing to abandon my friend, I inquired if he could ride if I saddled his horse, but he doubted it and was reluctant to try. I then made several unsuccessful attempts to produce fire. Just as I was about to mount and depart, I thrust my hand into the ashes to check if any warmth remained. To my relief, I found a small live coal of fire, no larger than a kernel of corn. Throwing it into a handful of material I had collected, it ignited into a flame within a minute, and in another minute, I had a decent fire. My friend emerged and crawled towards my side. Drawing our robes around our backs, we tried to warm ourselves, but due to the strong wind, smoke and flames were blown back into our faces by the reverse current. I saddled the other horse, packed the meat, while Sublette gathered sagebrush to keep the fire going, which was a considerable task, as it was dispersed almost as quickly as he added it. Finally, we mounted our horses and departed. I placed my friend ahead and followed, urging his horse forward. We had approximately 4 miles to reach timber. I realized I was likely to freeze while on horseback, so I dismounted and walked. The incline was northern-facing, and the snow was about 1 foot deep. I observed that my friend was too numb to walk, so I took the lead for the final half-mile and reached a grove of timber where there was an old native hut, one side of which was still standing. I started a fire almost immediately, then ran back and called out to my friend's horse, helped him dismount, and assisted him in reaching the fire. He appeared to lack his usual vitality and movement. He lay down, seemingly close to sleep, while I cooked meat on a stick. After a while, I roused him and provided him with his breakfast. Once he recovered, he was as energetic as usual.